So the cool thing about tabletop gaming is that there's really a lot of different options for everyone. It's finding them that takes the time because I really feel like when it comes to the hobby, you got to get your hands dirty with a lot of other games, see what you like, see what you don't like, what mechanisms you like, how you like to play, competitively, cooperatively, maybe a little bit of both. But that doesn't mean that everything is all wonderful, and I wanted to talk in good fun about some of the mechanics of some of the games that I really like and how I really feel like people maybe over-exaggerate a little bit. Now, these are going to range from the simple and the mundane to various serious, glaring issues. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll do my best to explain it. So, here are the biggest inconveniences of tabletop gaming. Starting with, this one's kind of medium range, low medium range, and that is component quality. And what I mean by that is, take this right here, Sheriff of Nottingham, a great social deduction game, lots of bluffing, you get to play the role of the sheriff, and I don't want to get too much into it, but I definitely recommend looking into it. But the whole premise of the game is you want to get your goods into Nottingham, and whoever the sheriff is that round, depending on your communication with them, they might want to inspect your goods, and you better be hoping you're not trying to bring in contraband. Now, when I say bringing in, you put cards into a little velvet bag it has, and I like that idea. The problem I have with that in execution is that the quality of these bags, they're not the greatest. I don't know if the second edition fixed that, but these here, and I'll see if I can take one out to show you. The problem I had with these is that the quality for them is not the greatest, and I'll show what I ended up doing as a end result, if I can find it. Okay, must be the one right at the bottom. Alright, yeah, I got it. Okay, so, sorry about that. Doing it live. So, they give you these little bags here, and you put cards in them every round. And, it looks good, except for this part right here, the little button. See, it's a combination of plastic and metal, and the problem is that if these things latch really hard, the buttons on them can actually snap. So the workaround I did for this was I just ended up going to the dollar store and getting those Velcro fasteners on one that actually did break, and ended up using that instead. And believe it or not, that one solution was a pretty genius one. So I will say, as I pick up the other bag on the floor, I will say when it comes to component quality, trial and error, do what works best, because I really feel like if you cheap out on some qualities, it can really hinder wanting to play the game. I know there are a lot of games from the past where I didn't really want to play anymore because the qualities suck. With that said, speaking of components, let's go to Dead of Winter for that one. We got Dead of Winter, a zombie survival game. Co-op, although it can turn competitive. There is a hidden traitor aspect of the game. And since we're on components, I'll say the components for this game are pretty top-notch. But this is going to talk about a certain component, if I can find it. Here it is. A component that I don't really like. I don't like because I don't feel like it's necessary in the slightest. It just gets in the way. And honestly, it just sits on the table. It doesn't do anything. It's not helping anyone. And that is, of course, and I know other games have this, cooperate with me, please, the first player token. What does this do, you might ask? Well, it's very simple. It just lets you know who the first player is. Now, some of you might be saying, well, that's really handy, especially if order of play rotates from turn to turn. You've got a point, except for one very important thing. You don't need that, because the person who's always right next to that person who starts is going to know it's their turn the following round. So, honestly, unless it's like a collector's edition game, I really don't see the point of having first player tokens. They just take up space. More cardboard that gets lost, and honestly, if it served a purpose, like if it was something used at the end of the game to help win the game, then yeah, I'd understand it. Like if there was a need to actually get the first player token in order to succeed, then yes, I would say so, but that's not the case here. So first player tokens, I can do without. Another one I have is, how do I put this? Deluxe packs. Now see, there's a good and a bad way to do this. Good way to do this. Take a game like Sushi Go, and then add to it, making various different ways to play the core game by adding different kinds of cards and rules. See, now that's a good way to do it. They basically just expanded the $8 game into like the $20 or $25 game, and honestly, I think this is a lot of fun. Get this. If you like a draft mechanic game, that's really good. The biggest culprit of games, which have been around forever, believe it or not, is this guy. And I'll tell you why. Because with this guy, they don't have an edition which has the 5th and 6th player expansion. You have to buy that separately. But that's not going to stop them from releasing its own standalone expansion. Its own standalone expansion. Its expansion for kids. And its TV license expansion. Now, these are just a few. Keep in mind, there are expansions to... Folks, there are expansions to these that they don't even release with the core game. Meaning, if you wanted to play 5 and 6 player on those, you need to go and buy those additionally. Hell, even the Star Trek one, the expansion is just board space. You don't get 5th and 6th player. And trust me, I like this version of Catan a lot. It is a lot of fun. I recommend getting it, especially if you love original Star Trek. But I will say this right now. This board fills up really quick, more so than on an original game. With that being said, when I found out there was a 5th player there was an expansion, all it does is add space on the board. It does not add a 5th and 6th player. That's my issue. If you're going to release deluxe versions, include everything. I don't have it up here, but even King of Tokyo is a little guilty of this, although they did release the Dark Edition, and I believe there is a special edition floating around that does have extra pieces. But, like, Catan, I feel like they're trying to do what Bethesda does with Skyrim and Grand Theft Auto 5. They're just trying to re-release it as much as humanly possible to milk it for all it's worth. They literally released a 25th anniversary edition of the original Catan, which I don't remember if it includes the 5th and 6th player, but really all it does is it adds some extra pieces that hold the hexagons and roll the dice and hold the cards, and that's really it for an extended price. The downside is that the box can't hold a lot of those contraptions. Then they released the big 3D printed version, which again does not have 5th and 6th players, which, I'm sorry, Catan is one of those popular games I know of, and people love playing it beyond 4 players. So it's like, just throw all the kids in the pool, you know? So it's just not knowing how to do special editions. I mean, then there are games like Sagrada here, which they do release editions. They release them like in small ones, like there's a 5th and 6th player edition. And then there's also like scenario cards. Like I like how they did it. Like the first expansion was add more players. The next expansion was we're going to change how we play the game entirely. And then there was other ones that changed scoring. So that's cool. And then probably one of the biggest culprits here is re-releases that don't do anything different with the game. And while I don't have an actual original version, Monopoly is that guy. And I'm sorry, this is going to piss some people off. I don't hate Monopoly. If someone honestly wanted to sit down and, like, if they were to look at my whole game shelf here and wanted to play Monopoly, I'd say let's play Monopoly. But then I'd recommend them to something like this, Monopoly Villains, where this fundamentally changes the core of the game, whereas you're not trying to acquire property, but you're hiring villains to get contracts, and you get player bonuses based on who crosses go first. That's the issue I have with Monopoly, is that they take the same game, they put a theme on it, they charge $40 to however many dollars, and people just go for it. I mean, yeah, it's cool to have your supernatural version or your Pokemon version, but it doesn't do anything aside. You're literally just paying the same amount for them to play a version of Monopoly that I guarantee you probably don't even know the full rules for, because that's also a thing. A lot of people don't know the full rules. But then there's games like this variant or the In Space variant. Even the City Builders, which I'd argue is extremely poor man's version, even that tried to change how you played the game because the end goal was different than just acquiring property and having everyone go broke. But the thing is like, they know what they have. They're not stupid. They're going to keep releasing as people keep buying them. And that's my issue, is when companies like that are willing to go out of their way just to make that proverbial extra dollar. And Hasbro, I'm sorry, has a terrible tendency of doing that. Oh, City Builders was so bad. It's literally just Monopoly, except you're building cities. And for those of you who are saying, well, that doesn't sound too bad, you're building cities, it happens so generically and so fast it doesn't matter. And honestly, if you're looking to build a city, this is what you're looking for. Days of Wonder does no wrong. And then there's the last thing about it, like, I guess one of the biggest inconvenience when it comes to some games, and the issue I have is lack of explanation. If I can't hook somebody on the premise of the game right off the bat, if I can't do it in a small paragraph, then I've essentially lost in getting them into the hobby. Like, a game has to have a hook to it that people can understand. For example, do you want to work together with your friends to defeat the various monsters of the Universal Universe? You do? Well, then you've got Horrified. Plays just like Pandemic, except rather than fighting off a disease or various diseases, you're fighting off the Universal monsters like Dracula, the Mummy, Werewolf, Frankenstein's Bride, so on and so forth. How about, hey, do you want to play a simple tile-laying game where you get to play a dragon going along a path? Okay, well, a little bland, but Suro is what you're looking for. Really cool. You're just laying down tiles based on lines, and you travel those paths, and you want to make sure you're the last person to keep traveling before you fall off the map. Now, there are games where you try to explain how to play, and people have such a difficult time understanding the concept. And in all honesty, like, this all boils down to preference. Is this going to be something you have interest in? And people have varying interests. However, out of all the games that I am looking at, probably the one game that I have the hardest time explaining to people because of how it's designed, and don't get me wrong, it's a very beautiful game, and that's Tokaido. What do you do in Tokaido? Well, you're on vacation. A map goes from one point of Japan to the other, and your goal is to travel to various inns, hotspots, buy souvenirs, meals, and people ask, well, what's the whole point of the game? I said, well, it's ultimately a set collecting game. They go, but your vacation, like, see, that's what I mean. Like, the idea sounds really silly, and believe it or not, it actually is a lot of fun. But, like, when I say that, like, you're on vacation in Japan and you're visiting certain places, I mean, does that grab you? Or, probably one of the biggest culprits I have here aside from that, hey, Do you want to play a game where you're building someone's wall or floor using various designs? No? Okay, well maybe you'll... Have you heard of Azul? Yeah. It invites you, a tile-laying artist, to embellish the walls of the Royal Palace of Evoria. Now, you would know by playing this, but this is actually a really fun set collecting game with really cool, like, little ceramic tile pieces, and there's a great puzzle element to it. But again, the hook isn't there, and you're kind of wondering, what in the heck am I getting myself into? And if I got one more... Hey, do you want to play a member of a female royal family who's trying to gain the interest of the mother, the queen, and you end up winning by having the most interesting things in your court? Oh, you're a man? Well, do you want to try Monarch? I mean, you got to play as a woman, and that was a little more trivial. A lot of people can get around the whole gender role thing in games, and honestly, the rule book is literally the only feminine thing about that. The game itself is a ton of fun. I have a lot of fun teaching, but again, the hook is not there. I'm wondering if there's anything else that's really hard to explain. And then there's ones where it sounds good, but ultimately it's very frustrating because it goes from, hey, let's help each other out, to, hey, who can backstab the other first? And that is Munchkin. A giant take-that game where you and your friends can either work together to accomplish the goal or stab each other in the back because somebody has to finish the game at level 10. And honestly, the game itself is fun. I played it, but the problem is that there's always going to be that one person to ruin it because they're going to backstab everyone the entire time. It's like you have no reason to betray us. You are literally worse off for doing that because you're going to have to face these issues probably by yourself because you keep screwing everyone. But please keep screwing everyone over because you just want to be a miserable guy. But it's one of those games where everyone looks at it and they're like, "Oh, I've seen that in stores." And it's like, "Yeah, it's fun, but honestly, I feel like you need to buy expansions for it." And that's the last point I'm going to end on. Good little segue. Games that you feel like you need to buy the expansions in order to get the full experience from. Catan's a little guilty of that too. I really feel like 5 and 6 players should have been included, but whatever. I can deal with it. But games that feel like they need to have expansions in order to sell you on the full game. Now, not too many games are guilty of doing that, but I will say that one of the biggest culprits of games that if you really want to keep experiencing it, you need to buy the expansions for, believe it or not, is Dixit. Amazing game, tons of fun, a great concept. You play cards, you give clues, you want to be specific but not too specific, otherwise you don't gain points. The problem is that once you play this game a couple times, everyone knows the cards and everyone kind of has already gotten a feel for what the other person is going to say. So I really feel like in order, if you want to keep that fresh, you need to buy expansions and you need to maybe change how the game is played. Like a concept I came up with is instead of using phrases for the cards, use like titles of songs or movie titles to depict them, to kind of change it up a little bit. Another game where I want to say you need expansions to really, in order to really get from it, and I don't have the box with me, but I'd have to say, oh dear, would have to be Disney Villainous, and this is where I keep all of my Villainous. And that's mainly because the expansions are only 3 characters. And while you can play with the expansions on their own, it gets boring. But then the core version of the game, which has 6 players, and that'll last you a while unless you're playing with more than 2 or 3 people. But it's a game where you're looking forward to the expansion, and I will say that's not necessarily the rule of needing the expansion in order to play the complete game, but I will say that it's one of those games where it's so... It's so addictive. You want to keep playing, and that you want new characters, because you want to see how characters play against other characters. And then there's Marble Villainous, which plays differently than that. It draws from one Fate deck as opposed to several. And then to kind of like end it on a good note, then you got the games which sound so crazy in design, but just work. And as I'm looking at my collection here, games that just work, I mean, I've only played this on PC, but Terraforming Mars is a beautiful game where you want to be the first person to colonize Mars successfully. The game is extremely difficult to play, has a lot of pieces, a lot of math, but there's something about the idea that really gets people interested. How do I colonize Mars? Well, first I gotta make sure that there's trees that grow. And then that produces oxygen. And then, I gotta make sure to then produce water. Then I can build these colonies, and then I can get points, and I play this card to set off this card, and I can set a satellite into space, which will allow my resource production of this to increase. Like, there's a ton of that. And then you got really cool things like Mystic Vale, where it's a deck construction game, but you actually construct the cards as well, so you don't ever have the same two games back to back. So, yeah, this is just kind of my rambling. Games that, minor inconveniences that range from not a big deal to, weird and off-putting. But guys, that's going to do it for me. Hopefully you like the video. If there's one of these games you want me to talk about a little more in detail, let me know in the comments below. I have a lot I can talk about. Just don't know which ones. Help me out with that. Anyway, I'll see you later.